I had always been the picture of health. I exercised regularly, never smoked, and barely drank. I stayed on top of my doctor's appointments, never missing a single checkup. So, when the doctor looked at me with that grave expression and uttered the words, "advanced Hodgkin's lymphoma," it felt like I had stepped into someone else's nightmare. I stared at him, waiting for a follow-up sentence, maybe a reassurance that it wasn't as bad as it sounded. But instead, he began explaining the stages, the treatment, the brutal effects of chemotherapy, and the low survival rates for late-stage patients. My brain barely processed it all. How could this happen? I went through every logical reason in my head. Did I inherit it? Was it stress? Did I eat something wrong? But the doctor's words cut through my spiraling thoughts. Cancer doesn't always come with a reason. That was the part that frustrated me the most. I had done everything right, yet here I was, being told I might not make it. I left the hospital with a stack of pamphlets, a detailed treatment plan, and a sense of impending doom pressing down on me. I wasn't ready to die. I refused to die. On the drive home, my hands were clammy on the wheel. My wedding ring felt heavy, like it was reminding me of what I had to lose. Clara, Sienna, my family, my home, my future. How was I going to tell them? I sat them down in the living room, forcing a smile as if that would soften the blow. I need to talk to you both about something important. Clara and Sienna exchanged a glance. My wife had that familiar look, half distracted, half expecting me to say something about work. My daughter, on the other hand, had her headphones draped around her neck, a clear indication she was only half listening. I took a deep breath. I have cancer. Silence. The air in the room thickened. Clara blinked, then frowned as if I had just spoken in another language. Sienna shifted uncomfortably. What? Clara finally spoke. It's called Hodgkin's lymphoma. The doctors say it's advanced. But there's a treatment plan, and I'm going to fight it. Still, nothing. No immediate tears, no dramatic gasps, just shock. Then Clara sat back against the couch and let out a breath. Sienna, my baby girl, looked down at her hands, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. She was old enough to understand what this meant. So, you could die? She whispered. That question hit harder than the diagnosis itself. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure that doesn't happen, I said firmly. Clara rubbed her temples. But you're so healthy. I know. My voice wavered slightly, but I forced it steady. This isn't about what I did or didn't do. It's happening, and I need both of you with me. She nodded, but there was something in her expression that made my stomach tighten. It wasn't just fear, it was hesitation. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Clara scrolled through her phone beside me. The weight of reality was crushing me. Are you okay? I finally asked. She exhaled. I mean, what do you want me to say, Marcus? This is a lot. It was a lot for me too. I know, I said, swallowing my frustration. But I need to know you're with me in this. She hesitated. Again. Then she set her phone down and rolled onto her side. Of course I am. Through sickness and health, right? Something about the way she said it felt hollow. But I convinced myself I was just being paranoid. I needed to believe she would be there. The next morning, I began making arrangements. I had great insurance, a solid savings account, and a trust fund left by my grandfather. Our house was fully paid off, and I had set aside money for Sienna's college education. I wanted zero financial stress for my family. If anything happened to me, they would be okay. I spent hours talking to my financial advisor, updating my will, and ensuring Clara wouldn't have to worry if things didn't go well. But I was still determined to fight. A week later, chemotherapy began. If I thought I had prepared myself for the worst, I was dead wrong. The first session left me feeling like my body was shutting down. Everything hurt. My skin felt like it was burning from the inside out. My limbs were weak. Food tasted like metal. The drive home was a blur. When I stumbled into the house, Clara barely looked up from her laptop. Sienna was watching TV. I expected something. A hug, a reassuring word. How are you feeling? Instead, Clara muttered, dinner's in the fridge. That was the moment the first crack appeared. I told myself it was just a bad day for her too, that she was still processing things. But deep down, I felt it. Something was shifting. That night, I forced myself to eat, but every bite felt like chewing nails. When I tried to get up to rinse my plate, my legs nearly gave out. I gripped the counter, dizzy, nauseous, drained. Clara? My voice was weak. She glanced up from her phone. I think I need help getting upstairs. A pause. A long one. Then, Marcus, you need to try to do things on your own. You're not dying. My stomach twisted. I wasn't dying. Yet. But I was suffering. Still, I didn't argue. I just nodded, clenched my jaw, and forced myself up the stairs, gripping the railing like my life depended on it. I told myself it was just a bad day. But bad days started happening more and more. And so did the cracks in my marriage. I had cancer, but I was starting to wonder if I was losing more than just my health. The thing about chemotherapy is that it doesn't just attack the cancer. It attacks everything. My body felt like it was betraying me, every inch of it breaking down. The nausea was relentless, the dizziness unbearable. My muscles weakened to the point where standing for more than a few minutes left me feeling like I had run a marathon on broken legs. But the worst part wasn't the pain or the exhaustion. It was the loneliness. At first, Clara and Sienna tried. Clara prepared meals, helped me with medication, and made sure I was comfortable. Sienna would sit next to me and watch TV, at least keeping me company. But it didn't last. Within weeks, their patience began to crack. I noticed it in the little things. Clara sighing when I needed help getting up, Sienna rolling her eyes when I asked her to bring me water. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that maybe I was being too sensitive. Maybe the chemo was making me paranoid, making me see things that weren't there. But then the small things turned into big things. It started with the mornings. I had early chemo sessions, brutal, exhausting sessions that left me feeling like I had been hit by a truck. Clara had always driven me to the hospital. But one morning, as I struggled to get out of bed, I realized she wasn't up. I called out. No answer. I forced myself to get to the bedroom door and knocked. Clara? We have to leave soon. A tired groan came from the other side. Take an Uber. I didn't sleep well last night. I stood there, stunned. An Uber? I was too weak to even dress myself properly, and she wanted me to take an Uber? I wanted to be angry. I wanted to yell. But I was too exhausted to even process it. So, I called for a ride. I sat in the back seat, staring out the window, trying to convince myself that this wasn't as bad as it seemed, that she was just tired, that she would make it up to me later. But she didn't. That night, when I got home, she didn't ask how my session went. She didn't even look up from her phone. Sienna wasn't any better. At first, I thought she was just avoiding me because she was scared. Seeing your father, once strong and independent, now barely able to stand without trembling, must have been terrifying. But soon, I realized it wasn't fear. It was frustration. Dad, can you get it yourself? She groaned one evening when I asked her to bring me a glass of water. I blinked. Sienna, I can barely walk today. She threw up her hands. Then maybe don't ask me every 5 minutes for something. I didn't ask for much. I didn't think I did. But to her, every request was an inconvenience. That night, I sat in my bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand how I had become a burden in my own home. Then came the confrontation. I had noticed Clara barely spoke to me anymore. Meals were left in the fridge without a word. She stayed in the bedroom or on the phone for hours. When she was home, she was visibly irritated, snapping at the smallest things. I had to know why. I waited until Sienna was in her room, then forced myself to sit up on the couch as Clara walked past. Clara, we need to talk. She hesitated, then sighed and sat across from me. I swallowed hard. Do you feel like I'm a burden? She looked away. That told me everything. It's a lot, Marcus, she said finally. I didn't expect it to be this hard. I stared at her. Hard? Clara, I have cancer. She rubbed her temples. I know. Okay? But I didn't think it would change everything so much. I felt my stomach turn. Change everything? What did she expect? That I'd be sick, but still function like a normal husband? That I'd be dying but still smiling, making jokes, pretending everything was okay? She wasn't finished. It's just exhausting, Marcus. You don't understand how hard it is for us too. For them. I was the one with poison running through my veins. I was the one losing my hair, my strength, my dignity. And yet, somehow, I was supposed to feel bad for how hard it was for them. I turned to Sienna, who was leaning against the wall, listening. Sienna, is that how you feel too? She hesitated, then muttered, I just didn't think you'd be this needy. The word stung. Needy. I wasn't needy. I was sick. I took a slow breath, trying to keep my emotions in check. So what do you want me to do? Suffer quietly? Clara sighed. I don't know, Marcus. I just think, maybe we need help. I felt a flicker of hope. We can hire a nurse, I suggested. Her shoulders relaxed. Yes, that would help. I should have felt relief. But deep down, I knew the problem wasn't just the workload. It was that they wanted distance from me. I called the hospital the next morning and arranged for a home nurse to help with my care. When she arrived, she was kind, professional, and efficient. She helped me bathe when I was too weak, kept track of my medication, and made sure I never missed a chemo session. I should have been grateful, but as I sat in my home, feeling more like a patient than a husband, I realized something terrifying. Clara barely looked at me anymore, and Sienna hardly spoke to me at all. It wasn't just distance anymore. It was detachment, and I was beginning to fear that I was already dead to them. When the nurse, Melissa, arrived, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: relief. She was professional, warm, and incredibly attentive. She immediately put together a care plan, structured my meals, adjusted my medications, and even worked with the doctors to track my progress. She knew what she was doing. For the first time since my diagnosis, I didn't feel like I was drowning alone. But I made one critical mistake. I assumed my wife and daughter would be relieved too. At first, things seemed better. Melissa came in 4 days a week, ensuring I ate, took my meds, and got to my chemo sessions on time. She even encouraged me to go on short walks, slowly rebuilding my strength. I no longer had to beg Clara or Sienna for help, and that was the problem. Because once they realized I could function without them, their patience, what little of it remained, completely disappeared. It started with Clara's coldness. I would hear her on the phone with her friends, talking about me like I was an obligation. Yeah, it's been rough. I didn't sign up to be a full-time nurse. He has a real one now, thank God. I was getting burnt out. No, she's not bad. A little too comfortable, though. A little too comfortable? Melissa was nothing but professional. But the way Clara said it made me realize what she was getting at. She felt replaced. Which was ironic, because she had already checked out long before Melissa arrived. Then came the jealousy. I caught Clara staring Melissa down when she was setting up my medications one evening. Her arms were crossed, her lips pursed. I knew that look. I had seen it before, just not over something as ridiculous as a home nurse. Later that night, she rolled over in bed and said, "Do we really need her coming this often?" I sighed. "Clara, I can't do this alone. If you want to take over, we can cut back her hours." She scoffed. "That's not what I meant. I just think you rely on her too much." I turned my head to look at her. Rely on her? For what? Making sure I don't collapse in the shower? Ensuring I don't miss my medication? I exhaled. "Clara, she's doing what you don't want to do." Her jaw clenched. That was it, wasn't it? She wanted me to suffer just enough to feel like I still needed her, but not enough that it became her responsibility. Sienna, on the other hand, just stopped talking to me. Before, she at least pretended to care. Now she barely acknowledged me. She came home from school, disappeared into her room, and didn't come out unless Clara called her for dinner. At first, I convinced myself she was just being a teenager. But then one night, I overheard her on the phone. I had gotten up for water and passed by her room. The door was slightly open, and what I heard broke me. Ugh, I can't stand being in this house anymore. It's depressing. No, I don't even talk to him much. He has that stupid nurse now, so it's not like he needs me. Honestly, I just wish things could go back to normal. Normal. Normal, as in before my cancer. Normal, as in when I wasn't a burden to her. I walked back to my room in silence, my heart heavy. My own daughter resented me for being sick. A few days later, Clara snapped, Melissa had just left after helping me with dinner when Clara stormed into the living room. She stood in front of me, arms crossed. I want her gone. I stared at her. Melissa? Yes. I let out a humorless laugh. You mean the only person actually helping me? Clara's eyes flared. I don't like her here. I sat up, my exhaustion boiling into anger. Then take her place. What? You don't want her here? Fine. But you're going to be the one to get me to my appointments, track my medications, help me on my bad days. Everything she's been doing because you won't. Her lips parted slightly, but no words came out. Because she had nothing to say. I let the silence stretch. Then I spoke again. No? Then she stays. Clara turned on her heel and stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door. The next night, her mother called. I could already hear the disapproval in her voice. Marcus, I think it's inappropriate to have another woman taking care of you in Clara's house. I shut my eyes. Here we go. It's not Clara's house, I said. It's mine. There was a pause. Then, she's your wife, Marcus. You should respect how she feels. Respect. Where was the respect for me? For my pain, my suffering, my literal fight to stay alive? I took a deep breath, forcing my voice to stay even. If Clara wants to take care of me, she's welcome to. But she doesn't want to. So I have a nurse. And that's not up for discussion. Another long pause. Then, a clipped, fine. Click. I thought the worst was over. But then came the final betrayal. One afternoon, after another brutal chemo session, I arrived home to find a moving truck parked outside. Confused, I stepped inside. And what I saw made my stomach drop. Boxes. Empty shelves. Closets half opened, their contents gone. Then I saw Clara and Sienna standing by the door, suitcases in hand. Clara looked at me, not with guilt or sadness, but with relief. We're leaving. I stared at her. You're what? She exhaled, rubbing her temples. Marcus, I can't do this anymore. Sienna and I are going to stay at my mom's for a while. My blood ran cold. She was doing this now? Right after chemo, when I was at my weakest. I turned to Sienna. Is this what you want to? She wouldn't even look at me. She whispered it. Yeah. They left. They didn't even say goodbye. They just walked out. And I sat there, alone, in a house that suddenly felt too big. I had feared that cancer would take everything from me. But in the end, it wasn't cancer. It was them. The silence in the house was deafening. For years, I had come home to the sound of laughter, television playing, the clinking of dishes in the sink. Now, all that remained was the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the walls. I sat on the couch, staring at the front door as if expecting Clara and Sienna to walk back in, apologize, and tell me it was all a mistake. But they never did. I wasn't even sure how I felt. Angry? Hurt? Relieved? All I knew was that I was alone. And after everything, I had to keep going. My brother, Dylan, came over the next day. When he stepped inside, his face twisted in disbelief. They actually left? I nodded. His jaw tightened. Unbelievable. I expected pity, but all I got was rage. He sat down across from me and shook his head. Marcus, you gave Clara everything. She never had to work. She lived in a fully paid-off house, and you covered everything for Sienna's future. And she left you the moment things got hard? I didn't respond, because deep down, I knew he was right. Dylan let out a slow breath. I'm taking time off work. I'll stay with you for a while. I shook my head. You have your own family to worry about. You're my brother. You come first. I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that. For the next week, Dylan was my lifeline. He cooked, cleaned, made sure I took my medication. But his time off was limited. He couldn't stay forever. That's when he brought up Lillian. Lillian was his wife's younger sister. She had just separated from her husband, an ugly divorce that had left her with very little. She was also studying radiology at the university, and my house was closer to campus than her current place. She needs a safe place. Dylan's voice was firm. And you need someone here. It makes sense. I hesitated. It felt wrong. Having someone new in the house when the wounds Clara and Sienna left were still raw. But I wasn't in a position to refuse. So, I agreed. Lillian arrived a few days later. She stepped inside with a single suitcase, looking hesitant, almost like she was intruding. "Thank you for letting me stay," she said softly. I waved her off. "No need to thank me. If anything, I should be thanking you for putting up with me." She smiled. "Well, I did sign up to work in a hospital. Taking care of patients is part of the job." She said it like a joke, but something about the way she said patients hit me hard, because that's what I had become, wasn't it? A patient in my own home. But Lillian never treated me like one. She did the things Clara refused to do: grocery shopping, tidying up, handling laundry. But she never hovered. She never treated me like a burden. If I needed help, she helped. If I needed space, she gave it. One evening, I caught her studying at the kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks and notes. I leaned against the counter. "How's school going?" She groaned. "Brutal, but I like it." I smirked. "What's the hardest part?" She looked up at me. "Honestly, learning how to emotionally detach." That one sentence hit too close to home. Emotionally detach. Something Clara and Sienna had done the moment I got sick. As the weeks passed, I slowly adjusted. Lillian never pried into my past, never asked about Clara or Sienna. And that was the greatest gift she gave me. She let me grieve without forcing a conversation. One day, I was sitting on the back porch, staring at nothing, when she walked outside with 2 cups of coffee. She set one beside me and sat down. We sat in silence for nearly 20 minutes. And somehow, that meant more than any words she could have said. Then, the news came. I was cancer-free. The moment the doctor said it, I didn't even know how to react. I should have been elated, but all I felt was empty. For months, cancer had defined me. Now, I was just a man with nothing left. No wife, no daughter. Just a house filled with memories of people who abandoned me. Lillian was the first person I told. She grinned. "That's amazing." I nodded. "Yeah, but I must have looked as hollow as I felt, because her smile faded. She hesitated, then said, "So, what now?" And for the first time since my diagnosis, I realized I had no idea. What now? I had spent so much time fighting to survive that I hadn't thought about what happened after. Then, it hit me. I knew what needed to happen next. I needed to leave this house. I needed to cut ties with my past. And I needed to make sure Clara and Sienna never had a chance to take anything else from me again. So, I filed for divorce. And I made a decision. Lillian would keep the house. She had been there for me when no one else had. She deserved it. I deserved a fresh start. And that's exactly what I was going to get. Surviving cancer wasn't the victory I had imagined. There was no movie moment where I stood in front of a mirror, smiling at my reflection, feeling reborn. Instead, I sat in the hospital parking lot, gripping the discharge papers with shaky hands, staring out the windshield, feeling like a stranger in my own life. I was free of cancer, but I wasn't free of the damage it had done, because cancer hadn't just tried to take my life. It had taken my family, my marriage, my sense of home. And now that I had survived, I realized something. I wasn't going back to the life I had before, because there was nothing left to go back to. The first thing I did after hearing the news? I called my lawyer. I wasn't going to wait for Clara to suddenly decide she wanted her old life back. No, I was going to make sure there was nothing for her to return to. Filing for a unilateral divorce was easier than I expected. Since Clara had left of her own free will, had abandoned our marriage, and had no financial claims over the house, the process was quick. I didn't even tell her about it. I let my lawyer send the papers to her mother's house. If she wanted to pretend I didn't exist, I had no problem returning the favor. Now, there was only one thing left to do. Leave. The house, once my pride, now felt like a graveyard. Every corner reminded me of what I had lost. The dining table, where we once had family dinners, laughing about Sienna's school stories. The living room, where Clara used to curl up beside me, pretending to care about my favorite shows. The bedroom, where I had once thought she'd stand by me, through sickness and health. But the worst part? It was the silence. I had spent months in this house alone, waiting for my wife and daughter to at least check in, to ask if I had survived. They never did. That's how I knew I had made the right decision. The day I told Lillian she could keep the house, she stared at me, completely stunned. Marcus, what? It's yours, I said simply. I don't want it. She blinked. You could sell it. I shook my head. I don't need the money. I need a fresh start. And you've been here for me more than anyone else. Lillian sat down at the kitchen table, running a hand through her hair. I don't even know what to say. I gave a small shrug. Say yes. She let out a breath and nodded. Yes. And just like that, the house was no longer mine. I found a new place in the countryside, a small, quiet house with just enough space for me to start over. No memories, no ghosts of my past. Just me, my new life, and the chance to rebuild. The strangest part? Clara never reached out. She never called. Never asked why the house was no longer in my name. Never tried to fight the divorce. Which meant one thing. She had truly never planned to come back. And honestly, that was fine by me. Because I wasn't waiting for her anymore. I had survived cancer. Now, it was time to survive without her. Moving to a new town felt like stepping into another world. The house was small. Not the grand home I once owned, but it was mine. And that was all that mattered. No more shadows of betrayal. No more ghosts of the past lurking in every room. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. The town itself was quiet. The kind of place where people actually knew their neighbors. I kept to myself at first, unsure if I wanted to get close to anyone again. But then, I met Sophia. Sophia was my across-the-street neighbor, a widow in her 60s who spent most of her time on her porch, watching the world go by. She reminded me of the kind of kindness I had forgotten existed. One afternoon, she waved me over. Come sit. You look like a man with a story. I hesitated, but for some reason, I sat down. And slowly, over the next few months, I told her everything. The cancer, the abandonment, the fact that my wife and daughter had never once reached out after leaving. She listened without judgment. Then, she sighed and said, people show you who they are in your darkest moments. Your wife and daughter? They showed you. Her words stuck with me. Because she was right. For the first time in over a year, I started moving forward. I picked up woodworking, something to keep my hands busy, to fill the quiet hours. I built furniture, shelves, even started selling small pieces online. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And then, just when I thought my past was truly behind me, it came knocking. Sophia called me one afternoon. Marcus, I saw something strange today, she said. 2 women were snooping around your house. My stomach dropped. What did they look like? She described them, and I already knew. Clara, Sienna. I gripped the phone tighter. Did they say anything? Sophia hesitated. They knocked on your door for a while, then just waited in their car. I thought about calling the sheriff, but I figured they might be family. I let out a slow breath. They were. She caught the past tense immediately. Were. They left me when I was sick. Silence. Then, she simply said, if they come back, don't answer. I'll handle it. For the first time in over a year, I felt the old anger boiling inside me. Why now? Why did they suddenly care where I was? They had walked away when I needed them most. Now they were coming back? I didn't trust it. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let them ruin my new life. I should have expected they'd return. After all, Clara and Sienna had a pattern. They only cared when it benefited them. And now? Now they were sniffing around like they were owed something. But I wasn't the same man they left behind. I wasn't weak. I wasn't waiting for them. And I sure as hell wasn't going to let them take anything from me ever again. Sophia called again the next afternoon. They're back. I didn't need to ask who she meant. They're at your door, knocking. I can see them from my porch. My pulse slowed. A cold kind of anger settled inside me. I wasn't going to open the door. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me. So I let Sophia handle it. She walked over casually, greeting them with her usual warmth. Hello there, can I help you? Clara turned, relief flashing across her face. Oh, thank goodness. We've been knocking for a while. We're looking for a man named Marcus. He used to live here. Sophia played dumb. Used to? Clara nodded. Yes, my husband. Well, my late husband. He lived here before he passed away. My jaw clenched. So that was the game she was playing. She was pretending I was dead. I should have been furious, but instead, I found myself smirking. She was about to get a very, very rude awakening. Sophia tilted her head. Oh, that's strange. I live across the street, and I never heard about a death here. Clara shifted, clearly thrown off by the response. Well, it was after a long hospital stay, she said quickly. We're his next of kin. We just need to settle some things with the house. Sophia hummed. Oh, so you have a will then? A death certificate? Clara blinked. What? Well, if you're claiming next of kin, that means there's official documentation. You must have some paperwork from the county, right? Silence. Clara's mouth opened and closed. Then, her voice turned sharp. Who are you to be asking all these questions? Sophia just smiled. I'm just a friendly neighbor. That was when Clara snapped. Her voice rose. Mind your own damn business. This is my husband's house. That was my cue. I stepped away from the security camera and walked toward the door. Time to let them see the ghost they thought they could bury. I opened the door just as Sophia turned to walk back to her porch. And there I was. Alive. Well, and very much aware of their lies. Clara's face went pale. Sienna? She looked like she'd just seen an actual ghost. For a moment, no one said anything. Then, I crossed my arms. Looking for someone? Clara's shock lasted all of 5 seconds before she recovered. Marcus. She forced a smile, her voice dripping with fake relief. You're here. We thought, yeah. I cut her off, I heard. You thought I was dead. Convenient story. Her eyes darted to Sienna, as if looking for backup, but Sienna wouldn't even meet my gaze. Why are you here? I asked flatly. Clara straightened her shoulders. We wanted to check on you. You never called. We were worried. I laughed. Actually laughed. You were worried? I shook my head. You left me. You abandoned me when I was sick. You never once checked in after walking out that door. Marcus, it wasn't like that. I held up a hand. Don't insult my intelligence. She swallowed, but I wasn't done. You're not here for me. You're here because you thought you could claim something. I let my voice drop lower. But there's nothing left for you to take. Her face twisted. Marcus, we're family. I took a slow step forward. No, Clara. You made your choice when you left me to die. Sienna finally spoke. Dad, please, she said, her voice softer than I expected. We didn't think you'd make it. I turned to her. So you figured, what? That I was as good as dead anyway? She flinched. I exhaled sharply, looking between the two of them. You left me. You chose to leave. You don't get to come back just because your lives didn't go as planned. Clara's mask finally cracked. She scowled. Well, I hope you're happy being alone, Marcus. You drove us away. I smiled, stepping back inside. No, Clara. You did that all by yourself. And with that, I shut the door in their faces. Let them finally feel what I felt. Abandoned. I thought that would be the end of it. That after seeing me alive, well, and completely unwilling to entertain their nonsense, Clara and Sienna would take the hint and leave for good. But I had underestimated their desperation. Because when people lose everything, they don't just walk away. They lash out. And Clara? She was about to prove just how unhinged she really was. It happened 3 days later. I was sitting in my home office, deep in work, when I heard a loud crash. Glass shattering. People yelling outside. For a second, I thought maybe there had been an accident. But when I stepped out of my office and saw my front window smashed in, I realized the truth. And when I heard Sophia screaming outside, I knew exactly who was responsible. I stormed onto the porch. And there she was. Clara, breathing heavily, a baseball bat still clutched in her hand. Sienna stood beside her, looking horrified but not stopping her. And surrounding them? My neighbors, including Sophia, trying to hold Clara back as she screamed like a woman possessed. You think you can shut me out, Marcus? You think you can just walk away? I had never seen her like this. She wasn't just angry. She was deranged. My stomach twisted. Because this wasn't about me anymore. This was about a woman who had lost everything and now had nothing left to lose. and that made her dangerous. I walked up, keeping my voice calm but firm. "Put the bat down, Clara." She let out a bitter laugh. "Why? Afraid?" I took another step forward. "You should be." She blinked. "What?" I pointed behind her, at the two police officers stepping out of their car. Her face drained of color. She turned just as the cops reached for their handcuffs. "Ma'am, put the weapon down." Sienna started crying. "Mom, stop." But Clara wasn't done yet. She turned back to me, and before I could react, she swung. The bat came down fast, aimed right for my head, but the officers tackled her before it could land. She was done, finished, and as they pinned her to the ground, I looked at Sienna. She was standing there, frozen, watching her mother lose what little dignity she had left, and for the first time, I felt nothing for her. Not pity, not guilt, not even anger, just nothing. The cops cuffed Clara, leading her to the squad car as she screamed and cursed. They turned to me. "Do you want to press charges?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes." Sienna broke down completely, but I didn't comfort her. She had made her choice long ago. Now, she would have to live with it. Later that night, I did some digging, and what I found didn't surprise me. Clara's mother had died, and the house Clara had been living in all this time, it wasn't hers. It belonged to her mother's cousin, and after she passed, he decided to sell it, which meant Clara and Sienna had been kicked out, homeless, which explained everything. They hadn't come back for me. They had come back for a house to live in. But here's the thing. It wasn't theirs anymore, because I had already signed the deed over to Lillian, which meant they had lost everything. And the best part? That was their own fault. Clara was charged with vandalism, attempted break-in, and assault. Sienna, being a minor, got community service. And me? I finally got what I had been fighting for all along. Freedom. I filed for a restraining order. I changed my phone number, and I went back to my quiet life in my quiet town, knowing, for the first time in years, they could never touch me again. When I first heard the word cancer-free, I thought it meant I would feel whole again. That I'd wake up every morning with a newfound appreciation for life, that I'd breathe easier, laugh harder, and find meaning in every single moment. But surviving cancer doesn't erase the damage it leaves behind, because the cancer might have been gone, but so was my family. And in the end, the betrayal hurt more than the disease ever did. I never expected Clara and Sienna to come back after they left me. I had spent months believing they would never even think about me again. And honestly, I had been okay with that. But when they showed up, when they thought they could just walk back into my life and reclaim what they abandoned, it only proved one thing. They never saw me as a person. I was just a provider, an asset, a means to an end. And once I became too weak to be useful, they threw me away. Now that they were struggling, now that life had finally turned on them, they wanted me to pick up the pieces for them. But the version of me who would have done that? He died the day they walked out the door. The restraining order came through within a week. I made sure there were legal protections in place to ensure they couldn't come near me, my home, or anything I owned. And for the first time since my diagnosis, I slept without feeling like I had to watch my back. I wasn't afraid of them, but I also wasn't willing to give them another chance to hurt me. Clara sat in county jail, waiting for her court date. She had already tried to call me twice. The first time, I let it ring. The second time, I blocked the number. I had nothing left to say, because there was nothing she could say that would change the past. I had given her my loyalty, my love, 15 years of my life, and she threw it all away. I had accepted that. Now, she would have to accept that I was never coming back. Sienna's punishment wasn't as severe. Because she was a minor, she only received community service. I should have felt something for her. Maybe pity. Maybe a sliver of regret for the way things turned out. But when I drove past the side of the road one afternoon and saw her in an orange vest, picking up trash with the rest of the offenders, I felt nothing. Not anger. Not sadness. Just nothing. I had spent months waiting for my daughter to reach out to me. I waited through my worst nights, through the pain and nausea, through the loneliness and fear, hoping that maybe, just maybe, she'd check on me. She never did. She had chosen Clara, and now I had chosen myself. One morning, I was sitting on my porch, sipping coffee when Sophia came over. She placed a fresh loaf of bread on my table, something she had started doing every Saturday morning since everything with Clara unfolded. She sat down, took a sip of her own coffee, and smirked. "So, any more unexpected visitors lately?" I shook my head. "Not a single one." She nodded approvingly. "Good." Then, after a pause, she said, "You did the right thing, Marcus." I looked at her. She meant more than just pressing charges. She meant cutting them out completely. I exhaled. Yeah, I think I finally believe that. I got back into woodworking. I spent my days building furniture, shaping raw materials into something new, something permanent. It felt good to create again, to put my energy into something that didn't feel like a battle. I even started selling a few pieces online, making a name for myself in the community. For the first time in years, I wasn't just surviving. I was living, and it felt good. Then, one afternoon, a letter arrived. There was no return address, but I didn't need one to know who it was from. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Sienna. I stared at it for a long time. Then, without opening it, I threw it in the fire. If she wanted to talk, she had years to do it. She had the chance to stand by me. She chose not to. And now, I was making my choice. The last thing I did was finalize my will. I left everything to charity, every last dime, because the only thing Clara and Sienna had ever cared about was what they could take from me. Now, they would get nothing. Not my house, not my savings, not even a single word from me. They walked away when I needed them the most. Now, I was making sure they could never come back. That night, I stood on my porch, looking up at the stars. And for the first time since my diagnosis, since the moment I thought my life was ending, I felt alive. Truly, fully alive. No more ghosts of the past. No more waiting for people who never cared. No more pain, no more regret. Just me. And the future I had built for myself. I took a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill my lungs. And I smiled. Because this time, my life belonged to me, and no one else.